Hi, hello. I hope you can hear me. I don't normally make videos about the books that I read, although I have, obviously enjoyed reading for my whole life. But I thought it would be fun to make a video about the book I just read. And it would be fun also, if anybody ever watches this video, if you want to talk about it in the comments or whatever. But it would be even more fun to maybe try doing something a little bit like above and beyond the book community type of social media norm. So something that would be fun is that if you also read this book and you have thoughts about it or whatever, you could make a video like this, and in the comment section you can link your video, and like we could kind of have like a asynchronous type of chat or dialogue, or I don't know if you would call it a conversation, but a back and forth. We can share each other's videos and see what each other thinks. And to get started, I guess I'll introduce the book that I wanted to talk about is Piranesi. And before you continue watching on this video, I'm going to talk about the details from the book. So if you don't want like spoilers, or if you haven't read it yet, then you shouldn't keep on watching. So I guess first of all, I kind of want to talk about how I didn't like the book at first. Like, I started reading it, I think it was the first book I started this year, 2024. And I read it based on some recommendations, like social media, like influenced me, you could definitely say, to pick this up and give it a try. But that was mostly due to like just people raving about how much they loved it and wanted to read it and reread it. But it didn't include a lot of description about the book itself, which was fine. So at first I was reading it and I didn't like it. I didn't get the hype. Like, the main problem at first was that the setting, the narration, the characters, the plot, it was all very like contrived, if that makes sense. It was all very one-dimensional. For example, the narrator had this kind of like naivete and wonder that seemed very surface level, and like it just seemed very fake. Like an oversimplified view of I don't know, being in awe all the time and being like having too much reverence all the time about the setting. And then the setting itself was super like, artificial and contrived. It was inside of a massive mansion, and the only details of this mansion are a series of rooms that are filled with statues. And then the descriptions of the rooms and the house itself was so repetitive and like just like clunky, and it was like, the first vestibule of the third corridor of the 90th hall of the northeast western hall, or whatever. It was over and over and over again. Like, you'll know if you have read it, since if you didn't read it and you didn't want spoilers, too bad I've already ruined some of it. But like, it's written in a journal entry type of voice, and it's always like the entry for the 37th day of the 5th month of the year that the albatross came into the southwestern halls. Ow. Villain. That type of thing. It was always like just repeating these super mechanical and just like more labeling than describing kind of a thing. And so the experience of reading that, page after page after page, it became very like just dull and uninteresting. Like, there was no like conflict, no drama, no nothing was especially like wonderful or beautiful really to the reader. We were just watching the narrator be in wonder and awe, and like just documenting and defining rather than like describing and experiencing things. There was also a problem with the characters. There was only 2 characters. So already I don't like movies with limited characters. Like if I turn on like a show or a movie and there's one character or maybe two characters, I know I'm not going to like it. And in this book, there's two characters, at least in the beginning, and it's just, there's not really any conflict, there's not really any drama, there's nothing going on. But then it turns out as you start reading, you get a feeling that this like contrived, one-dimensional, artificial like details is actually becomes like a deeper part of the story itself, like a deeper part of the meaning behind the story, because you come to find out that the narrator and then this one other character, they live in an artificial like world, an alternate reality that is exactly artificial. It's made up, it's structured, it's not one dimensional in the sense that like it's like an illustration. It's one dimensional in the sense that like all of the input that goes into building this world just flows from one direction and there's no back and forth, there's no like multiple directions. So when you start to find that out, it becomes a lot more interesting. Like, so for me, when I broke through the book, like I read the first 50 pages or so and I put it down and I was just like, wow, I guess books these days. I didn't like it and I left it alone for a long time, and then I picked it back up and I started reading it again, and it was right in the part of the book where the other gives the narrator a pair of shoes or socks, shoes and socks, and then you get this list of all the things that the other had ever given the narrator, and then you start to think like these two people have access to two completely different I don't know, materials in the world, and so there starts to be this sense of like mystery. And then like as a reader, you start to get a little bit of a sense of like curiosity about the story. And then very shortly after that, we really get rolling. Like I read the first 50 or so pages, I put the book away and I picked it up again. And when I picked it up again, I finished the whole rest of the book, because you start to get drawn into this plot of like mystery and murder and like madness and like identity, memory. It really starts becoming an interesting story. And then also, not too long after that point, the writing style shifts as well. So in the beginning, it's very much like documenting and defining, and like there's kind of a detachment to the voice of narration. And then you start to get access to another set of journal entries. And yes, it is still a journal, it's still documentary in sense, but there's a little bit more of a narrative storytelling tone of voice in those later / earlier journal entries. So you get a little bit more of a, if it makes any sense, a more human voice coming through the narrator. So the story is just more interesting to read about. And then also you read about all these different characters, and you start to wonder, and it turns out to, like, you know, your suspicions are confirmed. Like you start to wonder if these people are the dead, the previous people who had lived, like the 13 dead people in the house. And then you learn about their backstories by reading these journal entries, and that is so much more interesting, and like the story just like pulls you along. Because you have like all this like pile of new information, and then you step back from that as the narrator closes the journal and goes to his present thoughts, and you and the narrator in turn, you wonder about the mystery, and you try and like puzzle it together. In that way, the writing style becomes a lot less like clean and detached and like mechanical, and a lot more like responsive and reactive and kind of like embroiled in the situation that's going on. And then you yourself, as the reader, you wonder, you know, what is going on with this world? Is the narrator mad? Like, is he an insane person? Are these the journals of like a madman? Is he truly in some type of alternate world? Is he like a prisoner in an experiment somewhere? Like, you want to know, so you just keep reading and reading and reading. And then there's this element of kind of like a large scale conspiracy in the words of the book itself. they kind of refer to it as like the death and stars kind of theme that is coupled with mathematics and anthropology throughout the story. So it really centers on this kind of question of how do human beings relate to the world around them, whether that is like the spiritual type of world of like mystery and perhaps like communing with the dead or gaining access to some special psychological powers. And the more they develop on that theme as you're reading through the journals and everything, you're feeling like you see these details where there's like, you know, magical rituals and incantations, and it really delves into this otherworldly, other realmly type of knowledge. And then it kind of brings you to the main overall theme of the story, which is like, I don't know, like archaeologically uncovering or digging up the past, but not the past of how people lived in the world, but the past of how people, ancient peoples, perhaps interacted with the world. So this kind of like psycho-spiritual archaeology of being able to influence. There's a really strong theme of like influencing the world is the goal of the other. Like the kind of like the villains of the story, their approach or their desire was to have control over the world and take their powers, the world's powers, in for themselves in some way. But the narrator, you know, you can tell it's not just like his naivete and his innocence. He does have a sense of, he respects the world. He is grateful for everything that he receives, which is basically just the basics of survival, like water and fish. Like he has this more of a sense of like gratitude and appreciation toward the world around him, whereas the villainous side of the story, they're plotting to somehow like take from and extract from and receive from the world, rather than just as the narrator calls himself, the blessed child of the world, or the blessed child of the house, or divine child, something like that. Like he feels that intimate bond, whereas the others, they are more trying to like exert their power over. And in some way, I guess when I think about it, I think about Matthew Rose Sorensen or the Blessed Child, like whoever, when he was outside of the house, his profession, like he was a scholar. I think it was like he started, all the people in the story, you know, it centers around like university studies and then leading into like the occult. And this guy, he studied math and then he studied, I think, anthropology, and his overall like focus is on transgressive ideas and transgressive thinkers. That's what leads him through this conspiracy, through this rabbit hole, leading him to get ultimately stuck in the house. And when I think about it, like the role of that theme of transgression or transgressive thinking, like going outside of the norm, crossing boundaries, etc., you could think of the way Matthew Rose Sorensen or the Blessed Child or whoever you want to call him. Like I wouldn't want to call him Piranesi, for example, because like that was more or less like his enslaved name. Like when Ketterly had him trapped in the house, he called him Piranesi as a way to mock him and make fun of him because he was able to navigate the labyrinth of the house. So I wouldn't necessarily usually refer to him by that name, like the name he gives himself. But anyways, it seemed kind of maybe transgressive of him to relate to the world in this like straightforward mutual way, rather than the way the villains or the majority of humanity is depicted as their relation to the world is like a constant struggle for power. But the fact that he changes his name and he has all three of these different names really centers around the theme of like identity in the story, and how when he goes through these different, his identities are really connected to his access to his own memories. And when he goes through these different identities, it's like the one character that he used to be kind of like falls asleep, and then he awakens as like a different character in somewhat of a like schizophrenic manner. But that was a really interesting theme throughout the whole story, especially when you get to the end and he becomes like this third persona. He's like the emergent, returned version of himself, who he's not Piranesi, he's not Matthew, he's someone different again. So in all three of those turns, you get this different narration style. So all in all, it turned out to be a really pretty beautiful and interesting, quick little story. I mean, it wasn't like phenomenal, but at the end of the day, there was nothing wrong with it either. Like, I would recommend it. But it does leave me with some lingering kind of like unresolved curiosities or questions or interests or things that I continue like thinking back to. Like, namely, the thing that I come to is like, why the setting, you know, like why a huge unending mansion with like classical European styled like statues. The most likely explanation, I guess, is that, you know, it's an English author, so like that context of like European antiquity is probably very like poignant, or like, I don't know, that's the imagery that they choose to like embody all of those themes and questions about like the glorified lost world and like the alienation caused by modern society. I don't know, it made me wonder, and I just couldn't I don't know, come up with a understanding of my own, I guess, for why it was this setting and why it was this kind of like white marble place, to represent all of the lost ideas and lost relationships of human history. I don't know. In the book, they say the reason they chose the house is to, quote, mingle the glory and the horror of existence. But that just, it wasn't satisfactory to me. The setting idea, I wonder if that matters. And then the other question that I kind of turn to is like, why water? Why the ocean? Why the sea? Like, the most powerful force inside the house itself is the four tides. And like, even when he exits the house, the narrator kind of feels that his identity are these tides, like these three tides that kind of, you know, ebb and flow throughout his life. In the logistics of the story, it seems like the water is what carves out the statuary into like the various shapes that represent the various like relations or ideas that have been like lost and displaced like away from the main world that you and I, you know, ostensibly live in. So the waters, according to the book, you know, as much as I can glean, like they represent the motion of like when those types of ideas, relationships, thoughts, values, whatever, exit this world. You know, and presumably that's due to like progress, like industrial type of progress. The waters, I guess, kind of like carry away from this world, gushing into the other world, you know, ravaging it back and forth, creating those statues that you see described in the book. And at some point, the prophet, he asks, like, isn't it so foolish to try and look in a cave formed by waters to find the mysteries, because the waters would be gone? But in the house, the waters are still there. And I'm wondering if that, like, maybe it implies that this is like a continual process that isn't finished. I don't know. I just thought it was weird. I thought the setting was weird, and I couldn't. I mean, I'm done with the book, and I'm not probably gonna read it again, or if I do, I might just like skim through it again. But it's like an unsolved mystery for my own mind is like, I don't know how I want to understand the setting of the book. I don't know. Anyways, I guess that's, those are all my thoughts. Like, I wrote down some notes before I got started. I said most of these things. Some of them are stupid, like identity and memory shift with the tides. Like, from the individual or from society, something is lost in the world, and then that loss is correlated by creation in the other world. So something that's lost in reality is created in alternate reality. Like the theory of how energy isn't created or lost, it just transforms, something like that. And then I made some notes about the themes of loss and death in not so much an afterlife, but like another life. So for example, like the narrator has such a great reverence for the 13 who had come before, and then the process of this statuary house, the statues represent like a reverence for the ways of the world that had come before. I made a note about the story being one of the reasons why I didn't like the story is that it was just a little too British. Like, it was all set in England, or not even just England, like London, but also there were places in like Scotland and Wales that were mentioned, and everybody was a little bit too proper, or like you just pictured everyone kind of wearing tweed, like all of the villains or the humans. I don't know, they're all humans anyways. So I made a couple of notes that I didn't talk about because as I was just chatting, they didn't really seem interesting or important. But like I said before, it would be interesting, like if you watched this video, not that I don't know, maybe someone out there will, but if you did, and if you also read this book, and if you also had some thoughts about this book, it would be fun, I think, if you are so inclined, or if that's something that you've ever thought about doing, write down what you thought and like record a little video and link it here, and I'll watch it, and we can comment on each other's things, and I don't know, that might be dorky, but might be transgressive. Anyways, bye. And then it's all like